What's going on, guys? Jordan Richards here from Destination Devy, here for your Dynasty Stock Watch for week number 13. Now, I wanted to kind of switch things up a little bit this week. Obviously, the NFL season is winding down, and so there's not a whole lot to gather as far as younger players, as far as stocks going up or down. We know what we know. There's been 13 weeks of data after this week. There's not a whole lot that's going to change dynasty value-wise until we get free agency situations change and things like that. So I kind of wanted to get into a bit of strategy as far as how I approach certain positions in startup drafts, how I approach trading for certain positions, how I approach dynasty in general, because other than the big performance from Cam Akers this week, there's not a whole lot of stock really changing. We saw the big performance from Cam Akers, so I wanted to mention that, and so he may see more carries in LA going forward, but it's not like you can trade for him in most leagues. It's not like you're going to be targeting that much in free agency because he's going to be very expensive to acquire. So I wanted to start off with the tight ends because, well, they're the worst position group, and it gives me some more data for the coming weeks for wide receivers, quarterbacks, and running backs. So I wanted to start with the tight ends and kind of tell you guys how I think that you guys should be approaching tight ends in Dynasty, because the difference between redraft and Dynasty is that you do see a lot of tight ends get drafted high in Dynasty drafts. So if you're new to Dynasty, you haven't participated in that much Dynasty, and you want to get into it this offseason, this will give you a little bit of a primer as far as how to approach tight ends. We all know about the big tight ends. As far as I'm concerned, the big two. Travis Kelce and George Kittle are the crown jewels. You see them go in the first, second, third round of startup drafts, and they are worth every penny. George Kittle this season is averaging 16 points per game. Travis Kelce is averaging 19.4 points per game in PPR, which is good for wide receiver 4 overall. If he was performing as a wide receiver, you're getting that out of your tight end slot, and he is always drafted after wide receiver 5 in most leagues. I'd say 95% of leagues. So he's going to be worth that price that you're paying, even though he may be retiring in the next 2 or 3 years, or he starts to break down a little bit. Tight ends do have a long lifespan, so we don't really have to worry about that with Kelce, and tied to Mahomes. He's going to be an excellent receiver for as long as you have him. Then you have George Kittle coming off of his injury, hopefully coming back this season. He's still an elite tight end in an elite system, playing for a very smart offensive mind. I have no concerns of him going forward. But the problem is the next group of tight ends. The next guy, you have Darren Waller. Darren Waller was about a 7th round, 6th round startup pick this year. And that's a little bit rich for me. I'm not really feeling that. I was never really feeling that. I didn't get a whole lot of Waller, especially in Dynasty, because I didn't really see his value go up substantially. And we haven't seen it. He's kind of just a tier above the next big group of guys I'm going to get into. And he's been good, around 13 points per game, but a little bit inconsistent. But he gets targeted a lot, which is good. Doesn't see the end zone too much, but he's been pretty good for a tight end as far as tight ends go. But again, you still pay a pretty decent price to get him. Now, when you talk about the next group of guys, basically tight end 4 all the way through 16, most of those guys fall between 12 points per game and 9 points per game. And that is not what you want to see as a dynasty owner, as a fantasy owner, because all of these guys are replaceable. We talk about how bad tight end is, and we talk about the landscape changing. These guys, you just plug and play, churn them in, churn them out. And for me, and the reason I want to bring this up is that there's not a reason to draft a decent tight end or an upside tight end in dynasty startup drafts, because the problem is that for the past 3 or 4 years that I've been playing, you see these guys go in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. It's Evan Ingram one year. It's Hunter Henry one year. Last year was Mark Andrews. This year was kind of Darren Waller. Zach Ertz has been in there, and he's been pretty good most of his career, especially in the recent years other than this year. But this year especially, we saw those guys drafted in kind of the 5th, 6th, 7th round, and they didn't really return that value. We're talking about the Noah Fants. We're still talking about Evan Ingram. We're talking about Mark Andrews, even Darren Waller to some extent. You're not getting the value that you hope to out of these guys when they're being outperformed by players that are drafted way later than them. We're talking about Blake Jarwin. We're talking about Hayden Hurst. And the reason why I bring up those guys specifically is because they were kind of the hot topic tight ends this offseason. They were the guys that were kind of getting into a new situation, potentially going to break out. And the problem is that even though they're tight ends, they don't cost a lot of draft capital. So you're able to still draft them in the 11th, 12th round. Like, I believe Blake Jarwin was the 20th tight end overall drafted. Dalton Schultz right now is tight end 11 on this season. Then you have Hayden Hurst was drafted as tight end 16 overall and is performing at tight end 9. Now, of course, you still have the Mike Gesicki's, who didn't perform very well. Austin Hooper, who some people actually did project to be a bust. I was actually on the other side. I thought he could be fine playing with Baker. We all know how that's turned out, and he's been injured a little bit. But even still, it doesn't make sense, even from rounds 3 all the way to basically 10, 11, 12. You don't even want to be looking at tight end unless you're getting a tremendous value. The two guys I'm going to be targeting this offseason, they're TJ Hawkinson and Dallas Goddard. Now, currently in points per game, TJ Hawkinson is the tight end 5 on the season, and Dallas Goddard is tight end 6. Both these guys are in excellent situations. Even though the coaching staff is changing in Detroit, you're still going to see a lot of TJ Hawkinson in the coming years, and he's going into that third year breakout. Tight ends, on average, take 3 years to break out. They don't really do it in the first year at all, like we've seen from Mike Gesicki. They take a step up in the second year, and we're finally starting to see TJ Hawkinson find his way in the NFL. He's had an excellent sophomore campaign, but we need to see a little bit more from him going forward. The same thing with Dallas Goddard. Dallas Goddard's been a tremendous tight end in the NFL so far. We've seen him perform very well next to Zach Ertz, and we've seen him perform without Zach Ertz in the fold. And so now it begs the question, are the Eagles going to finally do what we've been waiting for them to do for 2 years, cut the cord with Zach Ertz, and finally feature Dallas Goddard in that offense? We've seen how much Carson Wentz targets the running backs, targets the tight ends, likes to get the ball out of his hands quickly, and Dallas Goddard is going to be a product of that offense. Coming off the injury, he started a little bit slow, but we saw even this past week, he, I believe, had 70 yards and a touchdown against the Seahawks on Monday night, which is a terrific performance for any tight end, and that's something you're going to see going forward from Goddard. So those are kind of the only two guys. If you can get them in the 7th, 8th round, which is typically where you might see these guys fall, that's a spot where I'd be willing to take the shot on Hawkinson or Goddard, because I do think they have the potential to grow into that role and be better in that offense. And that's kind of the main reason why I want to target those two guys. I think they could be high volume. I think they could be excellent producers. I think they have touchdown ceilings. And I just really love what I've seen from both of them so far, as well as performing on a points per game basis. We talk about a guy like Mark Andrews, who will probably still have a 5th round draft capital. And yes, he could return to form, but it's just not something I want to bank on, because you can look at receivers this past season that were drafted in the 5th round, the Terry McLaurins, the DJ Sharks. It could be Jerry Jeudy next season after a down year. Jalen Reagor is probably going to be way down in ADP. There's just a lot of guys who could fall into that 5th, 6th, 7th round with much more upside than just getting another decent tight end. You can take a flyer on another Jimmy Graham again. You could take a flyer on a Hayden Hurst. You could take a flyer on Dalton Schultz, Blake Jarwin again, probably in that Dallas Cowboys offense. There's always going to be guys coming in that could potentially be the next decent tight end, the next serviceable tight end that you can start week in, week out. And you just kind of pick up a few of those guys in your startup drafts or trade for a few of those guys in the offseason, and you can usually fill the hole. The only guy I'll ever really trade for is if I'm a winning team or I'm a contender. I'll throw all my picks for Travis Kelce, because he's always worth it. Like I talked about, he's wide receiver 4 right now. If he's a wide receiver, he's averaging almost 20 points per game. He's a player who's been worth it for the past 3, 4, 5 years, and he's worth throwing those picks away to go and get Travis Kelce. Now, a player I want to make you guys aware of if you're not too deep into the Devy side, because obviously I work on the YouTube channel with Destination Devy with Ray Garvin, and so we've been talking about the tight end out of Florida, Kyle Pitts. I truly believe that he could be a top 5 tight end coming into the NFL next season as a rookie. He's probably going to be a first-round pick. He has over 30 receptions, and he has almost a 30% touchdown rate on those receptions. He has 8 touchdowns. If it wasn't for a concussion, he'd probably still be leading the nation in receiving touchdowns at the tight end position, not just as a tight end, as a receiver, period, in college football. He is that talented. He's probably going to get first-round capital, and I'd be looking to buy him in some of your dynasty rookie drafts and even in some of your dynasty startup drafts, because he's going to be that good. He's not going to cost as much as some of the other tight ends are. And when we talk about a guy who could be next up, who could be the next big thing in an offense, depending on where he gets drafted to, Kyle Pitts is definitely that guy. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please drop it a like and subscribe for even more content from the Mayo Media Network. Check out some of my work and some of Ray's work over on Destination Devy. Go and subscribe over there for even more Dynasty and Devy content that we try to put out, 2 or 3 pieces a week, 4 pieces a week, however much we can kind of get to. But definitely go and check that out. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week where I'll probably break down the quarterbacks.